welcome to my February wrap-up where I tell you about all the books that I read in February, give you some of my reading stats, and then tell you how I'm doing on my 2025 reading goals. We are going to just jump right in because I read quite a few books in February. According to Storygraph, I read 16, though some of the books that I tried a chapter of and DNF'd throughout the month are not included on there. So I just want to let you know that in February I participated in the Get a Clue readathon, and I did vlogs for the first 3 weeks. The last week I only read one book, so I'm just gonna kind of wrap up the readathon in here because one book didn't necessarily make a full video, but almost all of these have my reactions to the book as I was reading them during the month. So I would highly suggest, if you want more about any of these books, go check the reading vlogs for Get a Clue and you'll get kind of more information there. There's a lot of books. We don't want to be here for too long. So the first book I read was Star Spangled Jesus by April Joy. This is a nonfiction kind of memoir about April Joy leaving sort of a Christian nationalistic worldview and finding her own worldview outside of that Christian nationalism sect. I listened to this book basically all in one day. I think she has a really good voice. Coming from a very conservative Christian background, there were so many things I could relate to. Like, one of the things she talked about is how with all the very conservative Christian media kind of attacking different things at different times and saying they were evil, like one of the things was her brother and her were very much into Pokemon cards and they had been playing with Pokemon cards, and then all of a sudden the church was sort of putting pressure on people to kind of outlaw Pokemon in churches and that they were like evil, and the kids had to give away they had to like sell their Pokemon cards. And that actually happened with my brother, sister, and I with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because when you're like playing the game and when you like play a monster, you say like, I summon this, and my parents heard us saying like, I summon this, and they were like, summoning demons, and they made us throw them away. And so there were a lot of like relatable things like that coming from a conservative Christian background where I could just kind of laugh along with her at some of the silliness of some of the things. And then there were a lot of things where it really made me think about, how does a church go so far into the Christian nationalism where they truly think we should make everyone act like Christians even if they're not. It was a very interesting read, and I didn't agree with all of the things in it, which I don't think many people would, but I thought it was a very interesting point of view because that wasn't necessarily the churches I grew up in. Our churches looked very different from the churches that she was talking about. So it was really interesting to kind of see another point of view. Next, I read Murder by Degrees. This is by Ritu Mukherjee. This was a murder mystery that I read, and I gave it a 3 stars. It was fine. I don't really remember like a ton about it. It's following this lady doctor who kind of gets wrapped up in a murder mystery, and it's historical, and I thought it was okay. It was entertaining to listen to. I listened to it on audiobook, and it passed the time. I had a good time while listening to it, but it's not something that will like stick with me very long. And then I read a book for a vlog, my Taming the Shelves vlog, where I pick books randomly out of a jar and read them. I read one for that. I'm not going to tell you what it is now, but you'll see that in March when I finish reading the last book for it. Then I listened to The Lion Game by Ruth Ware. I had this physically, but it came in on audiobook, and so I ended up listening to it. And this book was another okay book. I would say this is on the lower end of my enjoyment for Ruth Ware. I thought the reveal in this was fairly obvious to me early on. I could kind of tell where she was going with it, but it kind of drug out a little too long. There were some things in there that felt a little icky to me, but overall it was an entertaining listen. I thought that following the girls when they were younger and when they were older, because this is about a group of friends, girlfriends, who meet at school, and I enjoyed listening to them kind of talk about their friendship and see what it was like and how it changed and evolved throughout the years. So it was overall an enjoyable read, but nothing to write home about. It was another 3 stars. Then I read on ebook from my library, Working on a Song by Anais Mitchell. This was a very fun read. If you haven't seen the Broadway musical Hadestown, it's a Orpheus and Eurydice retelling. And this book was a nonfiction book by the author of that play, who was kind of talking about how it evolved over time, because it was a play that workshopped many times. It had a few different runs, like off-Broadway and smaller theater runs, and then on Broadway. And she kind of talked about how, like, well, I thought Orpheus was going to be this way at the beginning, but then, like, the audience wasn't really connecting with him, and so then we, like, changed the lyrics to be like this, and it still wasn't really working for us. And so she just kind of basically talked about how she workshopped the play to becoming what it was. And I really loved it. It was super fun to read, very quick and easy, because there's a lot of, like, song lyrics. It was very cool to kind of see her artistic process. I gave that 4 stars. And then I listened to Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book in the Lunar Chronicles. And this one was just okay. I gave it a 3 stars. I read this for the Throwback Book Club, hosted by Danielle at Danielle Reads and Lizzie at Lizzie's Literary Life. And Cinder was a very solid book. I read that the month before. This one felt a little bit like a side quest, and we all kind of, when we were talking about it, we kind of agreed. It did feel like it was less focused on the plot. I think Cinder is a much stronger character than Scarlet. It didn't feel like Scarlet had much to do, and she didn't seem to have a whole lot to do with Cinder and Cinder's plot, so it felt a little disjointed in that way, but it was still an enjoyable listen. I didn't have, like, a hard time listening to it. It was just a solid 3 star. Next, I read a short story collection, We Are Where the Nightmares Go, by C. Robert Cargill, and this was kind of a hit and miss anthology of short stories, but I had started this maybe like a couple years ago, read a story or two, and then put it down and didn't come back around to it until it worked for a Get a Clue prompt. And I skipped a few stories that just weren't working for me, but overall I enjoyed this. My favorite story in it was a zombie dinosaur story that almost had me crying at the end, which I wasn't expecting. And this is mostly like fantasy horror. I would say it definitely leans toward more dark themes. There's a lot of themes about, like, life and death and who should choose, who lives and dies, and about facing maybe past sins and stuff like that. So it definitely leans toward, like, the more horror side of things. I gave that a 3 stars because it was very, like, hit or miss throughout the whole thing. Then I read volumes 5 and 6 of Tokyo Terroraba Girls by Akiko Higashimura, and this is a manga series that I am reading, and it's by one of my favorite manga authors. She also wrote and drew for the series Princess Jellyfish, which is a super fun series, and I actually think I like Tokyo Terroraba Girls more. It's really interesting and really good. So this follows a group of 3 women friends who are in their 30s and they're single and they're feeling very much past their prime. And they've sort of set this goal to themselves that they want to be married before the Tokyo Olympics. And it's about them striving to meet guys and maybe putting themselves in situations that's worse for them because they just are putting all their hopes on, like, romantic love. And it's kind of them learning their own self-worth and learning not to care what society thinks about when they should get married, and learning when to put a foot down if a relationship is not good, and kind of just, learning respect for themselves. And I find it a very funny and relatable and sad at times read. I really enjoy it. It kind of like hits me in the emotions a lot more than some manga series have in the past. And then my big feat of February, I still can't believe I read the last of this in February. That is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. I started this in December, took a big break through the last of December and most of January, and then finished it up in February. I have a whole spoiler vlog for this, but I love this series. I loved the ending. I think this book has some faults, but it didn't stop me from really enjoying it and loving it. And I'm sad that we'll have to wait so long to get more in this series, but it did make me excited for what's going to come next in the Cosmere. So if you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, I would highly recommend it. I love it. Or read anything else in the Cosmere. I think it's so good. Next up, I listened to and read Our House by Louise Candlish. This is another thriller. I thought this had a fun format. It's kind of in like a podcast format. So this was a book I ended up giving 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought the ending was very probably polarizing for a lot of people, I would assume, but I enjoyed it. I could think it kind of ended perfectly, and it was just really interesting because if you've ever seen Knives Out, the movie, or The Glass Onion, the structure is kind of like you see everything that happens and then it goes back and tells you like, this is how everything happened, this is how everything played out. And I thought this kind of had a similar structure. Like, you learn very early on what's going on, but you don't know why. And so then it kind of like backtracks and tells you everything that led up to what's happening and why characters are making the decisions that they are. So I thought it was interesting. Probably if I squint at it a little too much, the plot might fall apart. I don't know that it makes 100% sense all the time, but I enjoyed listening to it. It was a good thriller. Then I listened to What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This was awesome because one of my goals is to finish off series that I started before 2025, and this is one of those series. This one was just okay. I gave it a 2.5 stars. To be honest, I didn't feel like What Moves the Dead, which is the first book, needed a sequel, and I think this book showed me why it didn't need a sequel. We followed a really interesting character from the first book, but in this book, I didn't feel like there was much to her character, so she didn't seem as interesting. There were some interesting parts, there were some spooky parts near the end, but really for most of it, I was just kind of like, why are we here? What are we doing here? It kind of felt a little bit too much like the first book, just at a different location. So this was just okay for me, and I'm probably not going to continue on in this series unless I hear that people are like really loving the third book when it comes out. I read the book Robots vs. Fairies. This is an anthology with a ton of awesome sci-fi and fantasy writers, and the premise of this is the authors were given the prompt, who do you think is better, robots or fairies? Who do you think will take over the world? Write a story about that, or about that faction. And so it kind of alternated between a robot story and a fairy story. A lot of them were kind of like blended together, and I think this was hit or miss. I think the middle, as usual in short story collections, the weakest stories are in the middle, and I definitely thought that with this one, but there were definitely a few stories that I really loved. I loved the Ken Liu story. I loved the Catherine M. Valente, Shauna Maguire, some of my favorite authors who are kind of very solid authors for me. I love their stories in this, and it was a 4-star read because some of the stories were really strong. Some of them I just skimmed over and skipped, and I had a pretty good time with this, but I'm ready to pass it along now. Then I read a really short graphic novel that's kind of like a YA middle grade. Kind of reminds me of like Goosebumps, something like creepy but not like terrifying. It's called Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing Hahn. This is an older book that's been made into a graphic novel recently in 2022. And this is about a blended family where a dad and his daughter marries a woman who has a son and a daughter, and it's about the kids not getting along. The daughter from the dad's side kind of wants to break up the family, and they move out to the country next to a graveyard, and there's a ghost there, and it's how the kids kind of get wrapped up with the ghost. And it was cute. I read it in just one sitting. I needed it to help me with a prompt before I get a clue, and so I read it very quickly. I gave it 3 stars. Nothing to write home about, but it was fun. Then, one of my favorite books of the month, I listened to Cress by Marissa Meyer. I really enjoyed this. I think that Cress is a really fun character. I really liked what Marissa Meyer did with the plot, especially with the like Sleeping Beauty plot. I thought it was really interesting, and I think we left our characters off in a really interesting point where I'm kind of nervous going into winter. I'm not sure how everything's going to work out in the end, but I'm intrigued to continue on. And then the final book that I read and finished was A Killing Cold by Kate Alice Marshall. I won this in a Storygraph giveaway, and so I think it was an ARC or the book had like very recently come out, and this is about a woman who is engaged to marry this man who she finds out is very rich. They're going to like their family home up in the mountains, and it's about the chaos and intrigue that ensues with this very mistrustful family who does not necessarily want just anyone marrying their son. I thought this was just okay. I gave it a 3 stars. I thought this book had one too many reveals at the end. It would kind of like tell you like, this is what happened. And then it'd be like, oh no, this is what happened. Oh no, this is what happened. And it happened like 6 times, but none of the reveals were that interesting. It was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. And then another reveal would happen, and I'd be like, oh, well, yeah, now that you point that out, that makes sense. But it didn't floor me. This one was really just okay. It's not making me want to read Kate Alice Marshall again. I think that the plot structure, the writing, just didn't feel strong. I think this book needed to be edited in a different way to make it more interesting overall. I think a 3 stars is maybe a little bit of a generous rating. I wouldn't say I recommend it, but if you think the plot sounds interesting, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't read it either, if that makes sense. So I'll just kind of leave it there. Those are all the books that I read and finished. Some books that I either started and DNF'd or just decided that I was not finishing are here. I'm not going to go through all of them because I have videos talking about them, except for maybe the Moonstone. I started The Woman in White at the very end of February, and I wasn't enjoying it enough. And reading about the back of this, it's going to focus a lot on like the mystique of the Orient with like these like special Indian diamond and all the like mysticism around like other cultures in Victorian times, and that really irks me. It's a really, like, I know it was common. Victorians were like obsessed with the Orient and mysticism and all that, but it feels very racist now. So I was like, I don't like Wilkie Collins enough to even give this a go, so I'm going to get rid of it. Everything else I talked about in various videos throughout the month. If you want to know why I DNF'd them, you can go watch those. But there's so many books leaving my house, and I'm very happy about that. One of my big goals for 2025 is reading down the books that I own and sort of helping my books to fit better on my shelves without having to expand. So I'm very happy about all my reading this month. Now, to talk about the most exciting part, I want to tell you how I'm doing on my 2025 goals. So we'll talk about stats first. So these are cumulative stats. So this includes everything in January because I didn't want to make different pages for different months because I just didn't. I wanted one spreadsheet to have to update, and that was it. And I haven't fully, maybe next year I'll try to do each month separate, but I'm just going to show you this is cumulative January and February where everything's at. So we will start with the maybe most depressing one, which is the ratings. DNFs are still very high. I think that's probably 17 DNFs. Yeah, I have 17 DNFs, 0 1-stars, which is good. I think I tend to give up on books before they actually get 1 star from me. So I think that's why I never have 1 stars. 2 2-stars, which is okay. 10 3-stars. But the 4 stars were catching up this month. I got 8 4-stars and then 4 5-stars. Thank you, Tokyo Terror Rabbit Girls and Wind and Truth for giving me 3 5-stars this month. I definitely needed it. And then, yeah, that DNF stack is probably going to be pretty high because I have a lot of books on my shelves that I'm just not sure about, and I've been hanging on to them for a long time, and I'm pushing myself to get to them this year. For the format, I have read 24 owned books, which is amazing. 12 audiobooks, which makes sense. I listen to a lot of books on audio. And then 3 library physical books. So that's pretty good. I've been really stingy about which books I read from the library, and I'm tweaking that a little bit in March. So it's good that I'm staying real small in February and January. And then the series stat. So I have started 4 series. Now I will say some of those I have DNF'd right away. I started the first book and then I DNF'd it. But I have read 12 sequels, which is amazing. Things have been going really well on the series front. I've been really doing a good job at sticking with my series. Now, let's talk about my favorite part, which is my reading goals update. So if you haven't seen my reading goals video, I have set up a little game system for myself. If you want to know more about the specifics of how it works, please go check it out. I'll link it in the description below. And throughout the year, I'm working to earn points in different categories based on my reading goals for the month. So we are going to start with finding a new detective series I love. I didn't read any detective series books this month, so we're still at 3 so far, which is a bad rating. A bad rating gives me -1 point overall, so I'm going to keep track of that. Next are classics I own. So I added 1 more to this, so I have 2 so far that I have read, which I think is a bad rating. Yeah, so 2 is a bad rating, so that's another -1. But it's okay because this is cumulative throughout the year. I'm working to change this, so we haven't had any abysmal scores yet, which is awesome. Next is new to me authors that I own 2 or more books by that I haven't read before. And I added 3 this month, which is amazing. So I have read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 puts me at bad, but it's definitely getting up there because this is the one where I have to read the most books. In order to get to amazing, I have to have tried 23 authors. So the fact that we're still in a bad rating isn't super bad. We just barely made it into bad and we're not abysmal. So we're doing better. I'm glad I made so much progress this month because that's a big goal. The next one is some of my older mass market paperback fantasies, and I didn't make progress in this. So we're still at 3, which puts me at an abysmal rating, which is -2 points. Then I worked towards finishing series I started before 2025, and I finished, caught up on, or DNF'd 3 series this month, putting me at 5 series finished, which is probably the best that I'm doing in all of these. So 5 right now, still a bad rating, but we're getting there. I only need to finish 9 or more to beat this goal. So the fact that we're at 5 means I'm very close to getting an okay rating, and I will be getting probably positive points next month because I do have plans to work on some series. And then next is checking my percentage of books that I've read owned versus books that I have from the library. And according to my spreadsheet, I have read 88.89 books that I own compared to the books I've read from the library. So we're smashing this goal. We're in amazing. Amazing is worth 10 points. So that really boosts up my score, which is awesome. I'm really working to keep it in that amazing point, but I know I have been getting a few more books from the library here and there, so I need to stay focused on that goal and not get swept up in the shiny new books from the library. I want to be reading the books that I own. And then reading one big fantasy series. In January, I tried to read The King's Dragon by Kate Elliott. That was going to be my big fantasy series, and I didn't do it. I DNF'd the first book and got rid of the whole series. I didn't start any big fantasy series in February, though I am thinking that the Shattered Sands series by Bradley P. Bolio is going to be the series that I try next, and hopefully I'll have a better shot at loving this than I will the other series I DNF'd. So I'm still in abysmal, but I'm hoping next month we will start working on it. So abysmal, that's another -2 points. Now, finishing Taming the Shelves Part 1. So my big goal for this year is to get all of my books to fit better on my bookshelves. So I don't want any books stacked up on top of these books. All my shelves are double stacked. They are going to be double stacked for a while, but I don't want to be piling books like on top of those books on the shelves. So I'm going to go check on my shelves, and I'll come back and tell you how many of them fit the criteria for Taming the Shelves Part 1. Oh my gosh, I'm doing so well at this goal. I have 10 out of 12 shelves right now that fit into my criteria for Taming the Shelves Part 1, which is a great rating. Great is worth 5 points. That's awesome. I'm so stoked about that goal. I will add one caveat that I have a stack of Elizabeth George books that are not on the shelves right now. I've pulled them out because I have like 8 of them, and I haven't tried the first book yet in the series. I'm planning to hopefully in March or April be able to get to that one, because if I DNF the first book, I'm going to be getting rid of that whole stack. So those are off to the side. So Taming the Shelves Part 1 cannot finish before I deal with that stack. But I did deal with some books that I had kept aside that I wasn't sure about keeping this month. So I actually either shelved or got rid of about 9 books that were sitting on the floor instead of on the shelves. So I would say I'm smashing this goal, and I'm very excited to just see my shelves sort of tidy up and fit better. And I'm very excited about that whole project and about the points it's getting me towards my goals at the end of the year. So let's go ahead and tally up how well we're doing. So we are at a positive 7 points right now, which feels pretty good considering we're only a 1/6 of the way through the year. If I keep up at this rate, I know my points are going to keep climbing. I feel really good about hitting a lot of these goals, and I think things are just going to keep going well as long as I can stay focused on them and not get distracted by other things. So that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please let me know what your favorite book was that you read in February. I love to hear what you're reading and enjoying. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!